it's Mo. It is October 10th, and I have read 4 books so far in October. But I have not started my October vlog style monthly reading wrap up yet, so let's do that now. These are videos that I make every month where I talk about the books that I've read throughout the month in vlog style clips. I try to talk about them as close to when I've read them as I can, so I remember everything about them, or at least something about them. I try to tell you something about them. I try to let you know if I like them, what they're about, what I thought of them, and if you should read them too. The first book that I finished in October is Ecotopia by Ernest Callenbach. This is a sci-fi book written in the 70s, and it is all about an ecotopia. So part of the US has succeeded and become an eco-friendly country all on its own, made huge strides and great advancements in sustainable practices and in environmental practices, but it has cut off all communication with the US. So it does still communicate with Japan and some other places, but specifically the US and Ecotopia relationship is very strained and potentially very dangerous. So our main character is a reporter, and he is the first person after this succession, after many, many years, that is getting to go into Ecotopia and write an impartial article on his experience. So he gets to Ecotopia extremely skeptical. He's a little bit of a playboy. He has a family, ex-wife that he has a very acrimonious relationship with. He has children that he only sees once in a while. He has a girlfriend who both he and she have other relationships with other people, and they, keep it light, just have fun, etc. And he's very much part of the US as it is now, and very much a believer in, the construction, the roads, the pollution, all those things. The pollution's unfortunate but necessary, blah, blah, blah. So he gets to Ecotopia. He's very skeptical at first. He initially really doesn't understand the culture, but the more time he spends there, he spends about 6 weeks there, the more he realizes the benefits that have come from this succession, and that the lifestyle of Ecotopia is maybe a better way of living than in the US. He also develops relationships there, and it not only changes his idea about friendships and relationships and relying on people, it also changes his relationships about love and commitment and the idea of being in a romantic relationship. And of course, it changes his idea on pollution and on sustainability and accessibility and all of those things. This book is interesting because it is written as his articles in one section, and then in italics it's written as his journal that he's writing on his own while he's in Ecotopia. So we see the articles, at first very skeptical, becoming more accepting and more open to Ecotopia, and we see in his journals the behind the scenes happening of what's going on. This is definitely a book that's almost like an essay on what an Ecotopia could be, or a way that we could make a more sustainable and eco-friendly lifestyle and society, and less a novel. Like, it is a novel, but it's not as exciting or compelling or interesting or a full and well-rounded story as a novel could be. It's very much a consideration or an idea of what an ecotopia could be. I did enjoy it. It's definitely dated, and there's some really not good ideas, especially surrounding race and disability, some really outdated things, and definitely things that wouldn't be environmental now that we know that racism is inexorably tied with environmentalism, and also sustainability is all tied. All those things are tied together. But I did enjoy it, and I'm glad to have read it. There's a sequel to this, which is actually a prequel, which has to do with the actual succession of Ecotopia, so I would be really interested in reading that one. The next book that I finished in October was Hands by Moya. This is a collection of poetry by an Irish author. I really liked this collection of poetry because it is very very much about storytelling and little stories and little vignettes of life, which I like poetry about that. It has a lot of nature writing in it, but it also has a lot of city life writing in it, which I also enjoy, and it has some history in it too, which I think is cool. It's probably a little political that I didn't understand. I do tend to like more like US political poetry in some ways, but I did tab quite a bit at the bottom. This one was a fun one, easy to get through. Definitely enjoyed that one. As you will no doubt know, I lost a lot of footage recently. This footage I did not lose in that data purge or whatever happened to the other footage, but somehow I never finished talking about these two books, or I didn't record my talking about these two books. So the next book that I read in October was The Adventures of Amina Al-Sirafi, and forgive me because it's now towards the end of November, or at least past the middle of November, so if I don't remember some of these books quite as well as I did, or speak as eloquently about them as I first did, well, you'll never know, but I apologize anyway. So Amina Al-Sirafi is an adventure story about Amina Al-Sirafi, and she is a pirate. She has now given up the pirate life. She's older, she has a family, and she's secreted them away, and she takes just some odd jobs here and there as like a local old kind of kook in the town instead of doing her infamous and notorious pirating. But she was an infamous and notorious pirate, and when a issue occurs with one of these small jobs and her identity is revealed to perhaps the wrong person, she goes on one last job to help people out, to make a little bit of money, and to secure her, well, security, to secure the security of living her quiet life. So Amina gets the gang back together and they go on this adventure, and through that we learn about how they all became entangled. We learn about Amina's life, we learn about other people in Amina's life, we learn about the circumstances that led her to be a pirate and the circumstances that led her to give up the pirate life, and it is a fun, rollicking adventure. The narrative device of this book is that it is being told to us by a scribe who is along with Amina. It's an interview style book, so Amina often talks to the scribe or talks to other people on the side, and during the audiobook, I did read this book on audio, that part is like muffled, like she's talking to somebody, you know, behind a wall or whatever. I did not love that on the audiobook because the sections where she's muffled, the sections where she's talking to someone else, are so muffled that it was like really hard to hear, and oftentimes it would take me out of the story because of the audio, not because of the literary device that was used, but because of the actual audio. And during that audio, I would have to go back and re-listen to it because I like couldn't hear it. So I think that if I had read this physically, that wouldn't have bothered me at all. And I tend to like books that have that kind of narrative structure or that literary device, that structure device going on. And I like books within books, and I like epistolary novels with this. This isn't exactly that, but it's like borderline on that. And then we do get some chapters from that scribe as well. And we meet a bunch of people that Amina meets that she's either known before or that she now knows. And obviously this is a series, so this one last job, it's not a spoiler to say, turns into something else, not her last job. So this one was really fun. I really enjoyed it. I really wonder if Shannon Chakraborty is a person of color. I can't tell. Maybe someone out there would know. It seems that she's white, that she's just an American person who possibly married into a less Western style name. She is a scholar of Middle East and Middle East culture and folk tales and all sorts of things. So interwoven into this is Arab and Middle Eastern folk tales, culture, history, magic, spirituality. So it's hard to tell what is not real and what is real to the cultures that this actually involves, but it was really interesting to learn some of the history through a fictional lens, obviously, through a fantasy lens, but to just kind of have a more, I guess, have the folklore that you might know a little bit about more rooted in actual people's lives, even though they're not actual people. Does that make sense? I like books like that. I enjoy learning those things. I also enjoy learning about mythos, folklore, spirituality, whatever it is about different cultures through fiction, through fantasy. Is not the way I usually get it, but it is fun to do. This book did have kind of a twist, a couple of twists, or surprises, or plot reveals that I did not see coming, which I really enjoyed. One of them, the big one, I should have seen coming, but I like never did. But I enjoyed that it like got me, and I was like, oh, that comes together at the end. How fun. So I really did enjoy this one much more than I thought I would. I don't usually read fantasy, but I'm excited to continue on with this series when this series continues on. I don't know if I would read any other series by Shannon Chakraborty. I did enjoy her writing style in this, but her other works seem like extremely dense and large, either in scope or in actual book. And this is a chunk or two, which is partly why I read it on audio. I would definitely read this on audio, even though I had some issues with the audiobook production. I really liked the reader, and hopefully the same reader will do all the series. So I would definitely suggest checking this one out if you're into fantasy, if you're into Arab and Middle Eastern culture, if you want some combination of those two, or if you just want a fun pirate ride. The next book that I read in October was The Loft Generation, From the de Koonings to Twomley, Portraits and Sketches, 1942 to 2011, and this is by Edith Schloss. Edith Schloss was an immigrant to America in the pre-World War II times, and then this takes place during World War II, well, right after World War II, and it's all about Edith Schloss' life and her observations of Manhattan and New York and the artist community in New York during the times on the cover. This book was started by her. She was an art critic, she was a writer, she was an essayist, she was an artist, a painter, and she was married to artists, photographers, painters. Her son became one, and this book is her initial writings that then her son compiled all together and kind of finished with additional writings that she had done. So this one was really interesting, especially after reading Kafka Was the Rage a couple of months ago. That one more features like literary people, but of the same time, or in and around the same time, and this one more features artists. I love artists and I love modern art, and this specifically features modern artists in different movements around these times, including like Futurism and Cubism, the pop art scene, and lots of other things that I like and I have enjoyed learning more about. I really like Schloss's writing, and I like how she interweaves her own stories with the stories of other people. I like this kind of insight and look into artists' lives, artists, writers, people of the times' lives. So I really enjoyed both this one and Kafka Was the Rage. Kafka Was the Rage is much, much shorter and also was published posthumously, also was finished by a family member a little bit, but this one has a lot more meat. But you can definitely tell where kind of her writing of the story ends and where the kind of gluing together of different stories begins. It becomes a lot more scattered and a lot less focused in the end of this book. But I think it's really definitely worth the read. Super engaging, super fun, lots of photos, both in black and white, and then there's also some color panels, so you get to see her artwork, her husband's artwork, her friend's artwork. You get to see different periods of art that you might know and love. For instance, for me, Rauschberg's quilt from different perspectives. So if you're into modern art at all, I would definitely highly suggest this one. And those were two more books that I read in October. Let me get back to some footage that actually survived, and then we'll come back to me in a little bit. It is October 24th, and I have read quite a few more books in October. The next book that I finished in October was The Paddington Mystery by John Rode. This is a classic crime mystery novel. It is a Golden Age mystery novel written by John Rode, who was a prolific author back in the day in England in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. And this is his first of the Lancelot Priestley series of books. Lancelot Priestley is like an armchair detective. So in this book, he is an older man, and he's living with his younger daughter when a friend of the family enlists his help to solve a mystery. This friend of the family, this young man, has woken up with a dead man in his rooms, and he doesn't know how he got there. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know why he's being targeted for this crime, but it is obvious that he is the main suspect for this crime. So he enlists his family friend, Lancelot, Professor Lancelot Priestley, to help solve this crime. So it's very much in the vein of Miss Marple, in that, like, the actual detective is not on the scene for a big chunk of this book, and in the fact that the young, like, robust people in this book are the ones who go about doing all the work, and then our detective just kind of solves it at the end. So this one I read on audio. I've had this cute little edition for a while. I'm always interested in reading more Golden Age mysteries, but I did not love this one. I thought it was a little bit dry and a little bit confusing the way that it was structured. I didn't feel connected to the characters. Definitely armchair detective is not my favorite variety of detective. When it works well, it works. Like, say, Kevy's The Wilhelmina Murders, like, those work really well as armchair detectives because Wilhelmina is such a, like, vivacious character that you're really interested in what's going on with her, even if she's not, like, on the scene of the murders. And I think also a lot of times these work when the character that is the person going out and helping to retrieve clues and helping to do all the things, whether they're involved in the murder or not, have to be very dynamic characters as well. And I just didn't feel that way about the Paddington murder. I'm glad that I read it. I will definitely be keeping this edition, and ideally I will be rereading at some point. There's also a short story in the back called The Purple Line, so I do want to read that hopefully by the end of the year. But after I finished this book, I was definitely finished with it, so I didn't want to go on and read any more at that point. Not my favorite author, or not my favorite John Rode, but I've only read one of his books so far, and I will definitely keep reading. Maybe not in this series, we'll see. The next book that I finished in October was The House in the Pines by Ana Reyes. I read this for the Savage Prompts to read a book with an author as the same first name as yours. The House in the Pines is a mystery thriller. It is a debut novel, and it definitely reads a little bit like a debut novel. It's very lyrical. It's very purple prose. It's a lot of explanation. It's just over 300 pages long. It's like 315 pages. So it is pretty long, but it is made to feel even longer by the descriptive nature of the narrative and of the prose and the, like, kind of purple prose that is in this book. This book follows Moya as she is struggling with addiction, and she's struggling with the fact that her boyfriend of several years doesn't know about her addiction or the reasons for this addiction. And Moya is also in denial a little bit about why she has these addictions and what's going on with her. And as we learn more about Moya and learn about her trying to get out from under addiction, we learn that she has had some very traumatic things happen to her in the past. It's all brought up again while she's in this vulnerable state because she sees a video on YouTube of a girl drop dead, apparently for no reason, but she recognizes the person who is with this girl when she drops dead, and this sends Moya into action, actually, because she decides that she really has to resolve the issues from her past that have never fully been resolved, both in real life, in the physical life, and also in her mental space and in her mind and in her heart. So that sends Moya back to her small town in Massachusetts, where she kind of starts sleuthing and investigating. So, like I said, there's some interesting descriptions in this. There's definitely some overwritten language, but I didn't actually mind that much. I think the thing that I didn't like was just that this book felt very uneven to me, in that there were, like, slow, descriptive, long passages, and then there was, like, all of a sudden, like, a lot of explanation. It was just, like, slow, fast, slow. Like, it didn't really work in the pacing, and I think things came far too easily for Moya in some ways. But on the other hand, the reveals and the surprises in this book were very, very obvious, like from the beginning. So it was pretty obvious what was going to happen in this story, and it was pretty obvious like what the plot points were going to be, and it just didn't really like hold my attention a great deal. I started reading this physically, and then I switched to the audiobook. I did enjoy the audiobook, and like I said, there were some interesting ideas in this. I just don't think it was super well executed. Since this is a debut novel, I would definitely read more by Anna Reyes though, because I didn't end up hating this, I just didn't end up loving it. The next book that I read in October was The Summer House by Christina Enriquez, and this is a very short story that I got free with one of my subscriptions. I've been reading a bunch of those, especially in September, to work up enough to do another tier ranking. The Summer House is, I don't know what genre you would call this. I guess it's just literary fiction. It's certainly not thriller, although there are some like tense moments. It is about a middle-aged man. I think he's working in Mexico, and he kind of falls in with the wrong crowd. He gets a job working for like a mob boss, totally legitimately at first, but then the more his relationship with this mob boss gets intertwined, the more bad things or unlawful things he ends up doing. So it's a little bit just about him thinking about his predicament and where he is in life, and then when he is tasked to do a job for this mob boss and it reunites him with someone that he knew from his past, his whole idea of what's happening in the world and his participation in the world changes. So this one was interesting. It's very, very short. It's only like 50 minutes long. It's one of the shorter ones of these, but I did enjoy it and I'm glad to have read it. The next book that I finished so far in October is The Chosen and the Beautiful by Niveau. This is the second Niveau that I've read. I also read one of her very short stories from one of those subscriptions, and I really, really loved that one. It was very punchy. It was very concise. It was beautiful. It was descriptive. It had great character development, but all in, you know, an hour and a half or whatever it was. The Chosen and the Beautiful is a Great Gatsby retelling, and this one definitely didn't have the same conciseness, the same tightness as that short story, because this book follows Jordan Baker, who plays a very small part in Great Gatsby, but in this book, we see that she actually has a larger role to play. We just didn't know it. From Nick's point of view, we learn that she is much more of an observer. This book definitely diverges a lot from The Great Gatsby story. Great Gatsby is one of my all-time favorite books, so I was super happy to read my first Great Gatsby retelling, reimagining. The Chosen and the Beautiful, like I said, follows Jordan Baker, and we see how she comes to know Gatsby and Nick and the relationship that those three people have, along with the relationship that she has with Daisy. And in this book, she and Daisy knew each other long before they knew Gatsby, that any of them knew Gatsby. Gatsby. Which is kind of inferred in The Great Gatsby that Jordan and Daisy know each other and have known each other for a while. Jordan is of Asian descent. She is of Vietnamese descent. But in this book, we find out that she was adopted by a white family, raised as white, or raised with white privilege. She wasn't raised as white, but it shows how she has had to struggle with being a person of color in New York at this time her whole life. But also how she has definitely exercised certain privilege that other people of color don't have at this time. And this book is magical. That's another way that it greatly diverges from the original source material. So in this world, there are demons, there's demon blood, there's magic. People have different types of magic, and different people from different places have different types of magic. We see some of that magic, and we see some of the characters that we know and love having magic or having been affected by magic in some way. So this one's really interesting. I don't know if it worked or not, but I really enjoyed reading it. I really liked the story. I really liked Jordan Baker's character. Because I know the source material, because I know the traditional story of The Great Gatsby so well, there was a lot of twists and turns that I didn't didn't expect, and there was a lot of intermingling of like magic and of social topics and of relationships and different relationships, changing of relationships from the original book. So I really enjoyed that, and I really liked that this was a different take. I also really liked the world of New York that Nevo created and what was going on there. I'm super interested to read more in this series. The new book in this series, or companion novel, I'm not sure, to this series comes out in 2025. I'm super excited about it. I just heard about it. Just happened to be that I heard about it basically when I was reading this, so I can't wait to see what that's all about and read more in this universe. I don't know if that's going to follow Jordan Baker. I don't know if that's going to involve Gatsby at all. Like, who knows? But I don't think it really matters. Nevo could definitely veer from this path. She could even incorporate other classic books that take place in this area or in this world, and how those classic books kind of meld together. I'm not going to look it up. I'm not going to find out. I'm not going to read the synopsis. I'm just going to read that book when I get my hands on it. So those are 4 more books that I read in October, and when I read some more, I will let you know. Okay, I'm back. It's the same time as before, but I had to take my sweatshirt off because it's hot. So the next book that I finished in October, 100 Love Sonnets, Cien Sonetos de Amor by Pablo Neruda, translated by Stephen Tapscott. So this is a large collection of 100 love sonnets. Pablo Neruda was a Chilean author, and he was well known and well acclaimed for a while. He kind of came into acclaim even in America for a while, but then was largely forgotten. His most famous work is, 20 Love Poems and A Song of Despair, and then this kind of goes along the same themes. It's divided into morning, afternoon, and night, and it's all love poems to his wife and lover, Matilda, and their relationship. And kind of the beginning of this, the day section, is all of sonnets about his love for her and his idea of her and his visions of her. The afternoon has a lot more to do with how she supported him when he was first coming into some renown, and then also when he was falling out of renown. Obviously, it probably has a lot to do with like politics that were going on in Chile at the time, and also in the world at the time, and in his life and different things in his life. And then the night focuses a lot on his kind of fall from grace, fall from renowned and celebrity. Hey. His fall from renowned and celebrity, and then also his idea of death and thoughts of death. I'm not sure what his story was exactly, so I'm not sure if he was sick or if she was sick, but there's a lot of poems that seem to have to do with one or the other leaving behind their lover and their husband and their wife. So this is all told in sonnets, and then what I really like about it is that it has the Spanish on the side. One, I don't think these sonnets follow exactly sonnet rules, whatever the rules are for sonnets. I don't know what the rules are for sonnets. I'm not a huge sonnet fan in general. Just the structure of those poems is not always my favorite. But I did really like that they also had the pre-translated Spanish for each poem as well, because I was able to sometimes read some of it in Spanish. Now, I'm not really great at future tense, past tense, continuing tense, different things in Spanish. I'm not perfectly fluent in Spanish, but I'm pretty good. So a lot of it I was able to like glean what he was talking about from the words and the vocabulary that I know, even if I didn't 100% understand the text. And then I was able to read the English version as well, so I was able to get more out of it because I was also reading the English version. I did not by any means read all of these poems in Spanish. I just would pick some. Sometimes I would read the Spanish version first and then see how much I got out of it, and then read the English version. Sometimes I would read the English version, and if I thought it would be more easily accessible because maybe it was all in present tense, I would then read the Spanish version. So it was a really fun exercise. I didn't love all these poems. I did tab quite a bit at the bottom, but I don't know, I wasn't as connected to them as I am sometimes with poetry, but I definitely want to read more from Neruda and learn more about his different styles. Maybe sonnets are just not the ones for me. The next book that I finished in October is Nevada by Imogen Binney. This book was written in 2008, I believe, and came out in 2011, but it is definitely considered a queer modern classic, and specifically a trans modern classic. So Imogen Binney is a trans author who lived in Brooklyn. She lived in Brooklyn around the time that I did, so there's a lot of mention of Brooklyn, kind of at the end of when I lived there and beyond the end of when I lived there. But there's a lot of talk about Brooklyn, different Brooklyn neighborhoods, different Brooklyn landmarks, different things. So I really, really love that. I love books set in Brooklyn because I love Brooklyn because I lived there for 15 years. But I also just love books that are set places that I have been, because you can connect with them in a different way than other books of places that you've never been. I can imagine different places in the world, but I know Brooklyn. So it was really fun to read that. This book definitely reads like an early 2000s book in many ways. It's very conversational. It's very much like a, what's the word? Oh my God, what was that website? Like very much like Visco Girl, like very much like a, what is this called? Like a live journal, or what is that website that everybody had? Oh my God, I can't think of it. Those kind of journal image sites like that predate Instagram, where people like pour their heart out. I had one of each of those sites, of course. So it reminds me of that, but it's a lot of the internal monologue of our main character, Maria, who is as she refers to herself, a baby trans. She moved to the city as her old identity, and now since she's come out as trans and realized more of her trans identity, but she's really struggling with that trans identity and what that means for her. She's struggling with her girlfriend and their relationship and how she can connect to her girlfriend at the same time as being like very, very disconnected from everything in her life. So it's very much in Maria's head. It's a lot of dialogue. It's a lot about Maria exploring her transness and her thoughts on that and wanting to do better, but often making the wrong choices, both for her psyche and herself and for other people. The first part of this is all about her and what's going on in her life. And then the second part is when a shift happens in her life and she meets another person who she thinks is trans. So the kind of internal examination of transness shifts to an external examination of transness, and her trying to communicate with someone for maybe the first time, like the true nature of transness and of her transness. And I think like ultimately this book is how each trans person is different, just like each person is different, and how each person has to learn to communicate with themselves and understand themselves a different way. Nobody does it the same way, so we all are trying all the time, and it's a lot about introspection and just life inside your mind. But I really, really love this one. I flew through it. I read this one on audio as well, but this one it's like a super quick audiobook. I think it's only like 6 hours, but it would be super fun to read physically too, because it does have a lot of short little chapters. And most of the chapters are Maria, but there's almost an overarching like narrator voice that comes in and out of Maria's chapters, and then occasionally we get chapters from other people as well, more so towards the end of the book. But if you are interested in just a trans book, a fun trans book, not a wholesome, uplifting, necessarily trans book, but it felt very realistic to me. Obviously, I don't have the trans experience, I'm not sure, but to me, it felt like talking to someone who was sharing their experiences with me, and I really, really enjoyed that, and I really like this one. I guess Imogen Binney hasn't written that many other things, but I would love to read more of her writing, and I would love to read something that she wrote later in life, because this obviously is early in her writer journey, early in her personhood journey, early in her trans journey, so I would love to read something that was made later. And then there was a really interesting afterword on the audiobook that talked about how she wrote this book and why she wrote this book, different things that happened in her life, different writing that happened in her life around the time of writing this book that helped her. So I thought that was really fascinating. The last book that I finished in October is Sharks in the Time of Saviors by Kauai Strong Washburn. This is a Indigenous Hawaiian writer writing an Indigenous Hawaiian story about a family, and specifically the youngest son in the family, Noah, who has a miraculous story and possibly a special power, and how his family is dealing with that. It's told from the perspective of various family members, his mother, his brother, his sister, a little bit Noah himself, and it's told from Noah's conception with his parents, and then also throughout the years, kind of jumping forward in time. It's a lot about being poor and indigenous in Hawaii and what that meant to his family and how that influenced his family, and then later specifically about the 3 children of the family going to mainland America and going to school and their different trials and tribulations. Noah's brother's passages are a lot, and his sister's passages are a lot about how Noah was kind of the shining star of the family, this kind of beacon of the family of his parents, and how they felt both left out by that, but also escaped sometimes their parents' view, and then also how they loved their brother, but how they felt a lot of resentment towards him too because of his place in the family. So it was a really interesting story. I liked it. I read this one on audio as well, and it took me a while to get into. It's multiple perspective, which I don't love, so each chapter is from a different person's perspective. There's some different books in here as well, or different parts, and then we see the different person's perspective and the year, and then also where they are, because they do jump around in time. I thought the native spirituality and religion and ideas in this were really interesting. I don't know very much at all about Native Hawaiian spirituality or religion. I don't know much about myth or legend. I don't know where one stops and the other begins. I don't know where the two mesh. And I find books like this very interesting. It reminded me a lot of The Removed by Brandon Hobson, which is also about a family and the son in that family, and how the son's life changed the trajectory of the entire family, and how each member of the family copes with the developments that happen to their brother, son, etc. in the wake of the different things that happen. Obviously, they're different, but they are similar in that they are both written by Indigenous people, so there is a lot of that Indigenous spirituality or religion that many people would call magical realism, but I don't think is magical realism because it's religion. I mean, most people wouldn't call Jesus magical realism or God magical realism, so I would not call their religion magical realism. Even though I don't adhere or believe in that spirituality or that religion, it doesn't mean that it is not the real thing, if that makes sense. So I did like this one. It took me a while to get into, like I said, but by the end I was invested and I did enjoy it. It did make me want to read The Removed again. It wasn't as like gripping as I wanted it to be, but I did have a good time with it, and I would suggest it, especially if you like family dramas, especially if you like inter-family connectedness and the idea of the different perspectives on a family from the different family members. I think this is a really strong book in that respect. So those were all the books that I read in October. I only read 11 books in October. I really enjoyed a lot of them. I read some Indigenous work, I read some queer work, I read some fantasy, which I never do. I read a lot of books for like Booklist and other vlogs, which may or may not come out depending on how much footage I have lost. I read some nonfiction, I read some poetry, and I read mystery. I read all my favorite things, so that makes it a good month for sure. So let me know if you've read any of the books that I read here. Let me know what you thought of them. Definitely, I would love to have conversations about a lot of these books in the comments below. So leave me a comment if you have one. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.